One day, without warning, you'll wake up and realize time didn't do what you thought it would. It didn't slow down. It didn't wait. It didn't give you a chance to catch up. I'm 72 years old, and I learned this far too late. For most of your life, you believe you'll recognize the moment things go wrong. You expect it to be loud, dramatic, impossible to ignore. That belief is comforting, because it suggests there will be time to fix it. But life doesn't work that way. It doesn't fall apart in front of you. It quietly moves forward while you assume you're still in control. You wake up every day, do what's expected of you, stay busy, stay responsible, and you tell yourself you're making progress because you're exhausted at the end of the day. Days fill up easily. Years pass without resistance. Nothing feels broken, so you assume nothing needs fixing. You convince yourself meaning will come later, when life slows down, when you're more settled, when the timing feels right. That's the lie I believed for most of my life. When I was younger, I thought clarity was something you earned after endurance. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed patient enough, followed the rules long enough, life would eventually explain itself to me. No one ever told me that life doesn't explain itself. You have to interrogate it, and most people never do. I spent decades chasing what looked sensible instead of what felt true. I told myself the same things you might be telling yourself right now. This isn't the right time. I'll focus on what matters later. I can't afford to think like that yet. What I didn't realize was that later slowly becomes never without you noticing. The routines that keep you safe also slowly shrink you. They give you structure, but they also dull your awareness. And because everyone around you is living the same way, your quiet dissatisfaction feels normal. You call it stress, you call it responsibility, you call it adulthood. Anything but what it really is, a life drifting away from itself. No one warns you that comfort can be dangerous, not because it hurts, but because it numbs. It dulls your curiosity first, then it dulls your courage. Eventually, you stop asking yourself uncomfortable questions because they don't fit into your schedule. You stop wondering who you could become and start measuring your life by how well it resembles everyone else's. I didn't fail dramatically. I succeeded quietly, and that was the problem. I made respectable choices that looked good from the outside and felt empty on the inside. I stayed busy so I wouldn't have to listen to the unease growing in the background. Whenever doubt surfaced, I buried it under productivity. I told myself doubt was weakness. I didn't understand it was information. Years went by like that, then decades. This channel features people like me sharing life advice and personal experiences. If you found this helpful, please subscribe and turn on notifications for more. If you gained something from this, feel free to leave a comment and like the video. If you have a story or lesson that could help others, please send us on our email. Your story might be featured in a future video. Regret doesn't arrive as a scream. It arrives as a realization, a calm, unsettling clarity that shows you how many decisions you never truly made, how often you let circumstances decide for you, how many times you ignored the voice inside you because it felt inconvenient, unrealistic, or irresponsible. There comes a moment in life, usually much later than you'd like, when the noise quiets enough for honesty to speak. For me, it wasn't panic. It was recognition. The understanding that life doesn't pause while you're preparing to live it. Every year you postpone paying attention is not stored somewhere for later use. It's spent. If you're listening to this and feeling slightly uncomfortable, that's not an accident. Discomfort is often the first sign that truth is nearby. The most dangerous belief you can carry is that you have plenty of time to figure things out. Time doesn't announce when it's running out. It just keeps moving. And one day, you realize it moved without you. And once you notice that truth, you start seeing something else that most people never understand until it's too late. Time is not what you think it is. When you're young, time feels generous, almost endless. You measure it in years, not moments. You assume there will always be another chance to fix things, another season to try again, another version of yourself waiting in the future. I believed that too. I thought time was something I owned, something I could manage, something I could always make up for later. I was wrong. Time doesn't move the way we imagine it does. It doesn't pass evenly. It doesn't feel the same at every stage of life. When you're young, 10 years feels distant. When you're older, 10 years disappears faster than you can comprehend. Somewhere along the way, time stops feeling like a resource and starts feeling like pressure. What no one tells you is that time doesn't just pass, it accelerates. And it accelerates quietly. You don't notice it in your 20s or even your 30s. Life feels full. You're learning, building, experimenting. Even mistakes feel useful. But then something subtle happens. You start repeating more than you're discovering. Days begin to resemble each other. Weeks blur. You still feel busy, but the novelty is gone. And novelty, I learned too late, is what makes time feel slow. When your days are repetitive, your life speeds up. I remember looking back one day and realizing entire years had vanished without leaving a memory behind. Not because nothing happened, but because nothing changed. I was present, but I wasn't awake. I was moving, but not evolving. Time had been spent, not lived. The most dangerous illusion is believing that awareness will come automatically. It doesn't. Time doesn't tap you on the shoulder and warn you that you're drifting. It rewards routine with speed. The more predictable your life becomes, the faster it moves. And the faster it moves, the less opportunity you feel you have to change it. This is why people wake up one day feeling older than they expected. It's not the number of years that shocks them. It's how few moments they remember choosing consciously. I used to think wasting time meant doing nothing, sitting around, being lazy. Now I know that's not true. You can waste your life being extremely productive. You can fill every hour and still lose decades. Wasted time is not empty time. It's unexamined time. I spent years assuming I was being patient when I was actually being afraid. Afraid to disrupt what I had built. Afraid to look foolish. Afraid to admit that the path I was on no longer fit who I was becoming. Time gave me permission to avoid those fears until it didn't. Because here's the part that hurts. Time only feels abundant when you're not paying attention to it. The moment you do, you realize how much of it has already slipped through your hands, not stolen, given away, quietly, willingly. You don't lose time in dramatic chunks, you lose it in small delays, in hesitations, in waiting for confidence instead of acting despite fear, in choosing what's familiar over what's meaningful. Each choice seems small, harmless, reversible, until suddenly, it isn't. By the time I understood this, the calendar mattered less than the consequences. Some doors don't close loudly, they simply stop opening. Some versions of your life expire without announcing their departure, and once they're gone, no amount of regret can bring them back. If there's one thing age teaches you, it's this. Time is not something you spend later. You are spending it right now, whether you're aware of it or not. And awareness is the only thing that slows it down, the only thing that gives it weight. If you don't choose how you live your days will choose your life for you, and they will choose quickly. Comfort never announces itself as a threat. It arrives as relief. After years of effort, struggle, and uncertainty, comfort feels earned. It feels like safety, like proof that you've done something right. I remember the first time my life became comfortable. Not exciting, not deeply fulfilling, just stable, predictable, manageable. And I told myself that was success. I didn't realize I had just made a quiet agreement with my future self, an agreement that said, this is enough, don't ask for more. Comfort doesn't destroy your life overnight, it reshapes it slowly. It changes what you're willing to risk, what you're willing to question, and eventually, what you're willing to imagine. You stop asking bold questions, because bold questions threaten stability, and stability, once you have it, feels too valuable to disturb. The danger is that comfort feels like peace, But it's often just the absence of challenge, and without challenge, parts of you begin to atrophy. Not your ability to function, that remains intact, but your ability to grow, to stretch, to become something unfamiliar. Comfort trains you to protect what you have instead of pursuing what you could be. I watched this happen in my own life without recognizing it for what it was. I started choosing options that minimized friction. I stayed in situations longer than I should have because leaving would have been inconvenient. I avoided conversations that mattered because they might create tension. I told myself I was being mature, reasonable, realistic. In truth, I was being afraid. Comfort has a way of justifying fear. It whispers that now is not the time, that disruption is irresponsible, that you should be grateful instead of restless. And because those thoughts sound sensible, you rarely challenge them. You mistake self-betrayal for wisdom. Over time, comfort begins to rewrite your values. You stop valuing courage and start valuing ease. You stop valuing truth and start valuing harmony. You stop valuing growth and start valuing control. None of this happens consciously. It happens through repetition, through small choices that seem harmless on their own. I learned that comfort is not neutral, it is directional. It pushes you toward maintenance, not evolution, toward repetition, not reinvention. And the longer you stay there, the more expensive change becomes. Not financially, psychologically. The cost of comfort is not paid up front, it's paid later, in regret, in restlessness, in the quiet awareness that you settled before you had to. It's paid in relationships that grow shallow, because depth requires discomfort. It's paid in careers that feel safe but hollow. It's paid in a life that functions smoothly but lacks sharpness. There were moments when I sensed this happening, brief flashes of dissatisfaction, a sense that something essential was being postponed. But comfort is very good at numbing those signals. It offers distraction, routine, familiar rewards, and eventually those signals fade, not because the problem is gone, but because you've stopped listening. What people don't understand is that you don't drift into a small life because you're lazy. You drift into it because you're careful. You protect what you've built so thoroughly that you forget why you built it in the first place. And by the time you notice, your life is organized around avoiding loss rather than pursuing meaning. Looking back now, I can see how many decisions I framed as practical were actually acts of retreat. I told myself I was choosing stability, but I was also choosing limitation. Every time I avoided discomfort, I reinforced the belief that I couldn't handle it. And that belief slowly became my identity. The most painful realization isn't that comfort held me back. It's that I participated in it willingly. I traded the uncertainty of growth for the predictability of routine. And routine, when repeated long enough, becomes invisible. By the time comfort reveals its true cost, it's already shaped your life. Your days are full, but your spirit feels underused. You're competent, but not alive. Safe, but not satisfied. And the question that starts haunting you isn't, what went wrong? It's, when did I stop choosing? Most people don't fail to become who they could have been because they lack talent or opportunity. They fail because they slowly accept a version of themselves that feels explainable to others, even when it feels wrong to them. Early in life, you are surrounded by invisible boundaries, expectations, labels, opinions about what's realistic for someone like you. At first you resist them, you feel larger than the roles being offered to you. But resistance requires energy, and over time that energy gets redirected towards survival, approval, and fitting in. Little by little, you learn which parts of yourself are welcomed, and which parts create friction. So you edit yourself, you soften your edges, you lower your voice, you adjust your ambitions to sound reasonable. Not because anyone explicitly tells you to stop, but because you notice what gets rewarded and what gets ignored. And like most people, you want to belong more than you want to be misunderstood. I didn't notice when this happened to me. I only noticed the result. A life that felt smaller than the person I once imagined becoming. The world is very good at convincing you to live a borrowed identity. You absorb definitions of success that were never designed for you. You pursue goals because they sound impressive, not because they align with your values. And because these paths are socially validated, you rarely question them. You assume the unease you feel is your own flaw, not a signal that you're out of alignment. Fear plays a larger role here than most people admit. Not fear of failure, but fear of judgment, fear of looking foolish, fear of disappointing people who have grown comfortable with the version of you they understand. So you learn to manage perceptions instead of pursuing truth. I spent years performing competence while quietly suppressing curiosity. I told myself I was being disciplined. In reality, I was being obedient. I stayed within the lines because stepping outside them threatened the image I had built. And the more invested I became in that image, the harder it was to let go of it. This is how potential gets buried, not destroyed, just neglected. There's a moment in life when you realize that no one is coming to give you permission to change. No announcement, no external validation. The same forces that shaped you into who you are will resist who you're trying to become. Not out of malice, but out of familiarity. People prefer the predictable version of you, even when it costs you something internally. Most people never challenge this, because challenging it creates tension. It creates uncertainty. It forces you to admit that the life you built may not be the life you want. And that admission feels dangerous, especially when your entire identity is tied to being consistent, reliable, and understood. I used to believe becoming more meant adding things. More success, more recognition, more achievement. What I didn't understand is that becoming more often requires subtracting, letting go of expectations that no longer fit, releasing roles you've outgrown, disappointing people who benefited from your compliance. The tragedy is not that people fail to reach extraordinary heights, it's that they abandon their own internal standards so early that they forget what they were capable of aiming for. They settle into lives that are manageable, but misaligned, and because those lives function, they rarely feel justified in questioning them. But deep down, there is often a quiet awareness, a sense that you are living at a fraction of your depth, that your days are efficient but not expressive, that you have learned how to perform adulthood but forgotten how to feel alive inside it. By the time this awareness surfaces clearly, it often feels too late. The weight of responsibility, the fear of disruption, the belief that change now would invalidate everything that came before. So people stay, not because they are content, but because leaving would require confronting years of avoidance. What I wish I had understood earlier is this: you don't become who you're capable of by waiting for confidence. Confidence is a side effect of action, not a prerequisite. And the longer you wait for permission, from society, from family, from circumstances, the more likely it is that your life will be shaped by default rather than by choice. The most painful distance you can experience is not between who you are and who you admire. It's between who you are and who you know you could have been. Most people believe their life is shaped by hundreds of decisions. That belief is comforting, because it spreads responsibility thin. It makes every choice feel less important. But after living long enough to see patterns clearly, I can tell you that's not how it works. A life is not changed by many decisions, it is changed by a few, and most people avoid them for as long as they can. These decisions are rarely dramatic in the moment. They don't announce themselves as life-defining, they feel ordinary, sometimes even small. But they sit at the intersection of fear and honesty, and that's why they matter. One of those decisions is whether you will tell yourself the truth when it's inconvenient. Not the polite truth, not the version that lets you sleep at night. The uncomfortable truth that forces you to admit something has to change. Most people sense this moment early. They feel it as restlessness, as irritation, as a quiet dissatisfaction they can't fully explain. And instead of listening, they distract themselves, they stay busy, they rationalize, they wait. I waited. Another decision is whether you will live reactively or deliberately. Reactivity feels responsible. You respond to demands, expectations, and obligations as they come. You become reliable, needed, indispensable. But deliberate living requires something most people are uncomfortable with: choosing in advance what matters, and allowing other things to disappoint you. I didn't understand that choosing one direction means neglecting another. I tried to keep every door open. I tried to satisfy every expectation, and in doing so, I avoided committing fully to anything that might define me. The result wasn't balance, it was dilution. There is also the decision of how you relate to fear. Fear never disappears, it just changes its voice. When you're young, it warns you about failure. When you're older, it warns you about disruption. It tells you not to undo what you've built, not to risk stability, not to embarrass yourself by changing your mind. Fear becomes more persuasive with age, because it learns your values and uses them against you. I believed fear was protecting me. I didn't realize it was negotiating my life downward. One of the most important decisions you'll ever make is whether you measure your life by external markers or internal alignment. External markers are easy: income, titles, approval. They are visible and quantifiable. Alignment is quieter. It's the feeling that your actions reflect your values, that your time is spent in ways you can stand behind, that you recognize yourself in your own life. I ignored alignment for a long time because it was harder to explain to others, and slowly, I learned how to justify almost anything as long as it looked reasonable from the outside. Another decision that shapes everything is whether you treat time as something to fill or something to honor. Filling time keeps you occupied. Honoring time forces you to ask whether what you're doing deserves your attention. Most people fill, very few honor, and honoring time requires saying no, not just to others but to versions of yourself that no longer fit. What I learned too late is that life doesn't reward good intentions. It responds to patterns. What you repeatedly choose becomes who you are. Not what you think, not what you plan, what you practice. People often ask what I would do differently if I could start again. I wouldn't chase more success. I wouldn't try to be more impressive. I would make fewer, braver decisions earlier. Decisions that clarified who I was willing to disappoint and what I was unwilling to compromise. Because in the end, every meaningful life is shaped by the same few choices: whether you will live consciously or on autopilot, whether you will prioritize truth over comfort, whether you will act before certainty arrives. You don't need a new life to live better. You need a smaller set of decisions made honestly, and the courage to live with their consequences. At some point, you stop thinking in terms of years ahead and start noticing the years behind, not with panic, but with a quiet awareness that the future is no longer abstract. It has edges now, limits. You feel it in the way time passes faster than it used to, in how memories outnumber plans, in how quickly seasons seem to return. I didn't notice the exact moment this shift happened. No one does. One day you're thinking about what you might do someday, and the next you're thinking about what you never did. That's when time stops feeling theoretical and starts feeling personal. By the time you reach this stage of life, you've learned that most of what people worry about doesn't matter. The arguments, the comparisons, the endless attempts to appear successful, happy, or ahead, none of it holds much weight when you look at it from a distance. What matters is simpler and heavier at the same time. You begin to measure life by what stayed with you, the conversations you avoided but wish you hadn't, the people you loved but didn't prioritize, the moments you felt most alive and the long stretches where you were merely functioning. You realize that life wasn't shaped by the years themselves, but by the attention you gave them. What hurts is not that you made mistakes. Everyone does. What hurts is recognizing how often you knew better and still chose comfort, familiarity, or approval instead. How often you postponed honesty with yourself because it was easier to stay the same than to change. There is a particular sadness that comes from understanding that no one was stopping you. There was no villain, no great obstacle, just hesitation, just fear wearing practical clothing, just time moving forward while you waited to feel ready. If there's anything age clarifies, it's that readiness is a myth. You don't become ready by thinking. You become ready by acting. And every year you wait for certainty is a year you donate to indecision. But this realization doesn't have to end in regret. That's the part most people misunderstand. Awareness, even late, still matters. It doesn't erase the past, but it changes how you carry it. It turns regret into instruction instead of punishment. The question stops being "what did I do wrong?" and becomes "what will I do differently with what remains?" Because there is always something that remains. Even now, at this age, I understand that life doesn't demand perfection. It demands presence. It asks that you pay attention while you still can, that you stop treating time like something guaranteed and start treating it like something sacred. If you're listening to this and you feel a quiet urgency, don't ignore it. That feeling isn't fear, it's recognition. It's the part of you that knows your life is still unfolding, even if some chapters are already written. You don't need to rewrite your entire life. You need to stop drifting through the part you're in. Choose one thing that matters and treat it like it matters. Have the conversation. Make the decision. Change the direction, even slightly. Time doesn't need grand gestures. It responds to attention. One day, all any of us really want is to look back and recognize ourselves in the life we lived. Not the image we maintained. Not the role we played. But the person we chose to be when no one was watching. If you understand that now, you are already ahead of where I was, and that makes all the difference. This channel features people like me sharing life advice and personal experiences. If you found this helpful, please subscribe and turn on notifications for more. If you gained something from this, feel free to leave a comment and like the video. If you have a story or lesson that could help others, please send us on our email. Your story might be featured in a future video.